The throne room stretched before her like a cathedral of judgment, stone pillars rising toward shadows that swallowed the vaulted ceiling whole. Torchlight flickered against ancient walls carved with the histories of wolves who came before, their conquests and bloodlines immortalized in granite and gold. The air tasted of smoke and iron, heavy with the weight of centuries, and beneath it all, the faint musk of predators who had learned to walk upright, but never forgot their teeth. Elindra Valemoon knelt at the base of the dais, her white hair cascading over the crimson fabric of her dress like snow falling on fresh blood. Her hands trembled where they pressed against the cold stone floor, fingers splayed as if she could anchor herself to something solid in a world that had become quicksand. The pregnancy had just begun to show, a subtle rounding beneath the velvet that felt like both miracle and curse, hope and condemnation wrapped in the same fragile package. Above her, seated on a throne carved from blackwood and inlaid with silver that caught the torchlight like captured moonbeams, Aeron Darkfen watched with eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. His presence filled the room the way thunder fills the sky, impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. Long black hair fell past his shoulders, streaked here and there with silver that spoke of battles won and years survived. His beard was trimmed close, framing a mouth that rarely smiled, and a jaw that could have been chiseled from the same stone as his ancestors' monuments. Muscle moved beneath the dark leather of his clothing with predatory grace, each breath a reminder that beneath the crown and the carefully controlled stillness was something wild, something that could tear the world apart if given reason. His council flanked him like ravens on a battlefield, waiting to pick apart whatever remained of her dignity. She had practiced the words 100 times during the long walk through the fortress corridors, repeated them like a prayer or a spell that might somehow transform desperation into deliverance. But now, with his gaze heavy upon her, with the silence stretching taut as a bowstring, the carefully rehearsed speech crumbled like ash in her mouth. So she spoke from the raw wound of truth instead. "Pretend my baby is your heir." The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water, sending ripples through the assembled witnesses. She heard the sharp intake of breath from the council members, felt the shift in the air as shock gave way to scandal, scandal to judgment. But she kept her eyes on the floor, on the pattern worn into the stone by generations of supplicants who had knelt exactly where she knelt now, begging for mercy from kings who may or may not have possessed any to give. "I do not ask for love." Her voice was steadier now, though her heart hammered against her ribs like something caged and frantic. "I do not ask for power. I ask only for the chance to survive, for my child to survive. The clans cast out unwed mothers. You know this. They call us weak. They call us shame. They leave us beyond the borders where the wild things hunt, and winter shows no mercy. I am already condemned unless you speak a single word that might save us both." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the crackle of flames in their iron sconces, the distant drip of water somewhere in the stone depths of the fortress, the thundering of her own pulse in her ears. When Aeron finally spoke, his voice was low, textured like smoke over gravel, the kind of sound that made people lean closer, even as instinct told them to step back. "You come before the Alpha King and ask him to claim a child that is not his blood. You understand what you are asking? The scandal this would bring? The questions that would follow?" "Yes." The word emerged as barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she had already lost, everything she stood to lose still. "I understand that I am asking you to lie, to compromise your honor for the sake of a woman you do not know, and a child you did not father. I understand that what I ask is unforgivable, but I am asking anyway, because there is no one else to ask, nowhere else to go, and I would rather die trying than accept that my child's life ends before it even begins." Something flickered across Aeron's face then, too quick to name, too complex to translate into simple emotion. His fingers tightened on the armrest of his throne, knuckles going white beneath the tanned skin. Around them, the council waited like vultures, hungry for the denial they expected, the dismissal they anticipated, perhaps even the cruelty that would make the story worth repeating in taverns and training yards for years to come. But Aaron did not speak. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. In the pinned comment, you'll find a special selection of the best Amazon audiobooks that inspire our stories. If you purchase any audiobook through those links, you'll be directly supporting the channel and helping us create more stories. Tell us where you're watching from and how old you are in the comments. I hope you enjoy the story. He rose instead, descending the steps of the dais with movements that seemed both deliberate and dangerous, each footfall a declaration of power barely restrained. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the scars that marked his hands, the silver threading through the black of his beard, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes despite the strength that radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Look at me." It was not a request. Alindra lifted her gaze, her white hair falling back from her face as she met the storm of his eyes. She expected anger, expected disgust, expected the cold calculation of a king who saw only problems and solutions, costs and benefits, numbers on a ledger written in blood and loyalty. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like recognition, as if he were seeing not just her desperation, but the courage it took to carry it here, to lay it bare before witnesses who would judge her regardless of his answer. "You fear for your child." His words were not a question, but she nodded anyway. "You would give anything to protect them. Anything. Even your pride." "I have no pride left to give. Only this one last hope that the Alpha King might possess the mercy that my own pack denied me." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she wondered if this was how prey felt in that final instant, before fangs closed around vulnerable throats. If there was strange peace in knowing the struggle was over, the outcome decided. Then Aaron turned to face his council, his posture shifting into something that spoke of absolute authority, of decisions made that would not be questioned or challenged or second-guessed. "The child is mine." The words detonated like thunder in the confined space. Several council members rose to their feet in protest, voices overlapping in shock and objection and demands for explanation. But Aaron's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, commanding and absolute. "The child is mine. I will hear no debate on this matter. Any who question this truth, question their Alpha King directly, and will answer for that challenge according to our laws." The silence that fell was different now, charged with tension that crackled like static before a storm. Alindra felt tears burn behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these witnesses who would interpret weakness in 1,000 cruel ways. She wanted to thank him, to fall forward and press her forehead to his boots in gratitude that transcended language. But before she could move, before she could speak, the great doors at the far end of the throne room crashed open with force that made the torches gutter and dance. Lord Valamoon strode in like fury given form, his weathered face twisted with rage barely contained, his warriors flanking him in a display of strength meant to intimidate. Alindra's father had always been a hard man, carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains that bordered their territory. But she had never seen him like this, never witnessed the full weight of his wrath focused like a blade. He stopped halfway down the length of the throne room, his voice carrying with the resonance of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "If my daughter carries the Alpha King's heir, then the Alpha King will do her the honor of making her his wife, not his whore, not his secret shame, his wife, before witnesses, before the gods themselves." The challenge hung in the air like drawn steel, dangerous and undeniable. Around the room, warriors tensed, hands moving toward weapons they wore even in the presence of their king. This was the kind of moment that could splinter into violence with a single wrong word, a single gesture interpreted as threat. But Aaron did not reach for his blade. He smiled instead, a slow curve of his mouth that held no warmth, only the terrible promise of a predator who has accepted that bloodshed may be necessary and finds himself unmoved by the prospect. You speak of honor, Lord Valamoon, while your daughter knelt before me moments ago, cast out by her own pack, abandoned by whatever coward put this child in her womb and then fled rather than face the consequences. You speak of honor when your family showed none to her. My daughter's shame is her own. But if you claim her child, you claim the responsibility that comes with it. You know our laws as well as I do, Alpha King. A heir must be legitimate, recognized, protected by the bonds of marriage. Aaron descended the remaining steps, closing the distance between himself and Alindra's father with movements that seemed almost casual, as if approaching an equal rather than someone who had just challenged him before his entire court. But there was nothing casual about the power that radiated from him, the barely leashed violence that hummed in the air around him like a living thing. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room, ensuring there would be no misunderstanding, no question about what happened here today. Then we will marry, not because you demand it, but because I choose it. Because the woman who had the courage to beg for her child's life deserves more than the scraps your pack was willing to offer. Because sometimes honor is not about maintaining appearances, but about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. He turned back to where Alindra still knelt and extended his hand toward her, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. If you will have me. The question was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had anticipated, that for a moment she could only stare at the offered hand as if it were something from a dream, too good to be real, too fragile to trust. Around them, the throne room had gone silent again, every eye fixed on this moment, this choice, this impossible transformation of tragedy into something else entirely. Alindra placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses earned through years of training and battle, the warmth of his skin against her cold fingers, the strength that could crush but instead lifted gently, raising her to her feet with a care that contradicted every rumor she had ever heard about the fierce Alpha King. Yes, she whispered, and then again, stronger. I will have you. The ceremony was arranged with a speed that spoke of royal authority. Preparations that would normally take weeks compressed into days through sheer force of will, and the understanding that delay served no purpose but to feed gossip and doubt. The fortress transformed itself from seat of power into stage for celebration, corridors decorated with winter flowers that bloomed white and silver against the gray stone. The great hall cleared and cleaned until the ancient wood of its floors gleamed like dark water under moonlight. Alindra moved through the preparations as if walking through someone else's dream, attended by servants who treated her with the careful deference due to someone who would soon be their queen, but who they did not yet know how to read, how to categorize, how to predict. They dressed her in white silk that flowed like liquid moonlight, threaded through with silver that caught the candlelight and held it, transforming her into something that seemed to glow from within. Her white hair was left loose, cascading down her back in waves that contrasted with the deep crimson of her lips, the only color she wore aside from the flush that pregnancy had brought to her cheeks. She saw herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back, this creature who seemed composed of contradictions, fragile and strong, terrified and determined, a bride and a refugee, a mother and a stranger to her own reflection. In another part of the fortress, Aaron prepared with considerably less ceremony, dismissing the servants who tried to fuss over his appearance with a growl that sent them scattering. He understood the necessity of this marriage, the political protection it offered, the way it would shield Alindra from those who would otherwise tear her apart with whispers and cruelty disguised as concern. He understood his duty as Alpha King, the responsibility to protect those who sought his protection, even at cost to himself. What he did not understand was the strange tightness in his chest when he thought of her kneeling before his throne, the tremor in her voice when she had spoken of her child's survival, the way her hand had felt in his when he lifted her to her feet, small and cold and trusting in a way that made something in him want to roar at the world that had forced her to such desperate measures. He was not a man given to softness. His reputation had been earned through blood and steel, through the kind of decisions that kept his people safe, but ensured he walked through life with walls around his heart thick as castle ramparts. He had loved once, in his youth, and watched that love wither under the weight of expectations and politics, and the grinding reality that being Alpha King meant belonging to everyone, and therefore truly belonging to no one. He had accepted solitude as the price of the crown. But looking at his reflection now, at the man who would soon speak vows before witnesses and gods, he wondered if perhaps isolation was not price, but prison. If perhaps he had confused strength with the refusal to feel, power with the denial of everything that might make that power worth wielding. The ceremony itself was smaller than traditional royal weddings, but no less binding, held in the ancient stone circle that predated the fortress, where generations of Alpha Kings had taken their mates beneath open sky and watching stars. The winter air bit cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow, and the smoke from torches that ringed the circle like sentinel flames. The pack assembled as witnesses, warriors and elders, craftsmen and hunters, all come to see their king marry a woman most of them had never heard of until days ago, to accept as heir a child not yet born and surrounded by questions no one dared speak aloud. Elindra walked toward the circle alone, as tradition demanded, her white dress luminous against the darkness, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She could feel the weight of all those eyes upon her, measuring, judging, wondering what power she possessed to convince their king to claim her, what magic or manipulation had brought them to this moment. She lifted her chin and met their stares with what composure she could gather, channeling fear into the appearance of calm, terror into the illusion of grace. At the center of the circle, Aaron waited, dressed in black that made him seem carved from the night itself. His long hair pulled back from his face, revealing the harsh beauty of his features, the scars that marked his jaw, the silver at his temples that spoke of years bearing weight most men would crumble beneath. Torchlight played across his face in shifting patterns of light and shadow, making him seem both more and less than human, something ancient and powerful, given temporary flesh. When she reached him, he extended his hand again, and she took it without hesitation, letting him draw her into the circle where the elder waited, an ancient wolf with eyes clouded by cataracts, but sight that saw deeper than vision, into the truth beneath appearances, the intention beneath words. The elder spoke the old vows in a language that predated common tongue, words that rumbled like distant thunder, carrying weight that transcended their meaning. Aaron repeated them flawlessly, his voice steady and strong, each syllable a promise carved into the foundations of the world. Elindra followed, stumbling slightly over the archaic pronunciation but pushing through, determined not to fail in this, not to give anyone reason to question the validity of what happened here. When the elder bound their wrists together with cord woven from silver thread and dyed red as heart's blood, Elindra felt the magic in it, the way it pulsed with something older than words, deeper than law. This was not merely ceremony, but covenant. Not just politics, but power recognizing power, soul acknowledging soul. The elder spoke a final blessing, calling on the old gods and the new, on the spirits of the wild and the wisdom of the ancestors, asking them to witness this union and hold it sacred. Then he stepped back, releasing them to complete the ritual in the way of their people, the way that had sealed such bonds since wolves first learned to love. Aaron's free hand came up to cup Elindra's face, his palm warm against her cold cheek, his thumb brushing just below her eye where a tear had escaped, despite her determination not to cry. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, offering choice even in a moment where choice seemed long spent. She closed the distance instead, rising on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle, achingly tender, a kiss that spoke of protection rather than passion, of promises made and meant even when the world might think them madness. The pack howled their approval, the sound rising into the night sky like prayer or proclamation, echoing off the mountains and rolling back amplified, until it seemed the very stones themselves acknowledged this new bond, this unexpected alliance, and in the center of it all, bound together by cord and vow, and something neither could yet name, Aaron and Elindra stood as king and queen, husband and wife. Two people who had come together through desperation and duty, but who felt, in that moment beneath the cold stars, the first stirring of something that might, given time and care and courage, become something real. The feast that followed was lavish despite the short preparation. Tables laden with roasted meat and winter vegetables, bread still warm from the ovens, mead that flowed like rivers of amber honey. Musicians played traditional songs on instruments carved from wood and bone, the melodies both mournful and joyful, speaking of endings and beginnings, loss and gain, the eternal cycle that governed all living things. Elindra sat at Aaron's right hand, the position of honor, feeling the weight of her new role settle across her shoulders like a cloak, both protective and heavy. People approached throughout the evening to offer congratulations that varied wildly in their sincerity, from those who seemed genuinely pleased to those whose smiles held edges sharp as knives, already calculating how this shift in power might affect their own positions, their own ambitions. Through it all, Aaron remained a constant presence, his attention divided between the demands of his position and a surprising attentiveness to her comfort. When she shivered despite the roaring fires that heated the hall, he draped his own cloak across her shoulders without comment or fuss. When her cup emptied, he filled it himself rather than summoning servants. When particularly bold or tactless guests asked questions too intrusive, too personal, his responses shut down the inquiry with finality that left no room for argument. She watched him navigate the complex currents of pack politics with the ease of long practice, noting how he balanced strength with wisdom, how he could be fierce in one moment and measured in the next, how he commanded absolute authority but chose when to exercise it and when to let challenges pass unmet. This was a man who understood power not as something to be wielded constantly, but as a resource to be deployed strategically, who recognized that true strength often lay in restraint rather than reaction. As the night wore on, and the feast gradually dissolved into smaller conversations and quieter celebrations, Aaron leaned toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear beneath the music and laughter. "You should rest. It has been a long day and you carry more weight than yourself alone." She nodded, grateful for the permission to escape, to find quiet and solitude after hours of being observed and assessed. He rose with her, his hand at the small of her back guiding her through the crowd, parting people before them with his mere presence, until they reached the doors that led deeper into the fortress, toward the royal chambers that were now hers as well as his. The walk through the corridors felt surreal, torchlight casting their shadows long and strange against stone walls carved with the history of wolves who had walked these same paths, ruled from these same rooms, loved and fought, and died, and been remembered or forgotten, according to the whims of time and the mercy of chroniclers. Servants bowed as they passed, melting into alcoves and doorways, like ghosts, who understood their presence was neither required nor desired in this moment. When they reached the doors to the royal suite, Aaron paused, his hand still resting lightly against her back, his expression difficult to read in the flickering light. "These chambers are yours now, all of them. I will take the adjoining room and disturb you only when necessity demands it. You need not fear that I will ask more of you than you are willing to give." The words were meant as reassurance, she understood, an attempt to ease whatever anxiety she felt about this strange marriage, this alliance forged from desperation rather than desire. But something in them made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name, a strange sadness that he thought she feared him, that he believed his presence would be unwelcome, that the kindness he had shown her today would not continue beyond these first necessary appearances. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning it for more than just the offer of privacy, for more than just the space he was giving her to adjust to this new reality. For everything. For saying yes when you could have refused. For standing between me and the wolves who would have torn me apart. For giving my child a chance to live. He looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch, his storm-gray eyes searching her face as if looking for answers to questions he had not yet learned how to ask. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like pain. "Your child will want for nothing. This I swear to you. Whatever else may come, whatever difficulties we face, that one thing will remain true." Then he stepped back, breaking the moment, returning to the careful distance he seemed determined to maintain. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed strange coming from a king to anyone, let alone to the woman who was now his wife, only by necessity's cruel arithmetic. "Good night, Alindra. Sleep well." She watched him walk away toward the adjoining chamber, his footsteps echoing down the hall, until a door opened and closed, and she was left alone in the torchlit corridor, feeling more isolated than she had felt kneeling before his throne, begging for mercy she had not been certain would come. The days that followed established a pattern that was both comfortable and strange, a kind of companionable distance that allowed them to coexist while maintaining the careful boundaries Aaron had drawn that first night. They took meals together when his duties allowed, conversations polite and increasingly less awkward as they learned each other's rhythms, the topics that interested versus those that made silence seem preferable. Alindra discovered that the fierce Alpha King, who terrified his enemies and commanded absolute respect from his warriors, was also someone who loved poetry, who could recite entire verses from texts centuries old, who understood beauty and longed for it even as his life required him to dwell often in brutality's harsh realm. She saw him reading sometimes in the library, his large scarred hands gentle with ancient pages, his expression softened by whatever words he found there, transformed briefly into someone younger, less burdened, more hopeful. She learned that he rose before dawn every day to train, that he pushed his body through exercises that would exhaust men half his age, that he demanded more of himself than he ever demanded of those who served him. She watched him once from a window overlooking the training yard, witnessed the deadly grace with which he moved, the raw power barely contained in every strike and parry, the way other warriors gave him wide berth not from fear, but from the understanding that when the Alpha King trained, he did so with an intensity that allowed no room for distraction or divided attention. But she also saw the way he stopped to help a young warrior correct his stance, spending time to ensure proper technique rather than simply criticizing failure, saw the way he spoke with elders who sought his counsel, listening more than speaking, absorbing their wisdom even when it contradicted his own instincts, saw the way he settled disputes among his people with fairness that considered not just law but circumstance, not just guilt but intention, not just punishment but prevention. This was a man who understood that strength came in many forms, that leadership was as much about serving as commanding, that power meant nothing without the wisdom to wield it justly. And slowly, carefully, like spring returning after the longest winter, Alindra felt the ice around her heart begin to thaw. Aaron, for his part, found himself increasingly drawn to the woman who now shared his life in name, if not yet in truth. He had expected fear, perhaps resentment at being trapped in a marriage neither had wanted, forced into proximity by circumstances beyond their control. Instead, he found quiet strength, resilience that bent but did not break, grace under pressure that reminded him of the finest steel, tempered through fire into something stronger than raw iron could ever be. He noticed small things. The way she touched her growing belly sometimes when she thought no one was watching, her expression soft with wonder and terror intermingled. A mother already loving a child not yet born. The way she had begun to explore the fortress, curiosity overcoming initial caution, asking questions about the history carved into stone and woven into tapestries, genuinely interested in the legacy she had now become part of. The way she treated servants with the same courtesy she offered nobles, seeing people where others saw only function, offering kindness where it was neither required nor expected. He found himself timing his schedule to coincide with hers, more often than coincidence could explain, taking meals in the small dining chamber rather than eating alone in his study, lingering over conversations that had no particular purpose except the pleasure of her company, the sound of her voice, the way she thought about things from angles he had not considered. He told himself it was duty, ensuring his wife felt welcome and protected. But late at night, alone in his chamber with only firelight and honesty for company, he admitted what his heart already knew. He was falling for her. Falling for Alindra as he had not allowed himself to fall for anyone in longer than he cared to remember. Drawn to her not despite the circumstances that brought them together, but because of what those circumstances had revealed about her character, her courage, her capacity to endure. Winter deepened, snow falling thick and white beyond the fortress walls, transforming the world into something clean and new, unmarked by the complicated tracks of history. Alindra's pregnancy progressed, her body changing in ways both beautiful and strange, life growing within her with the insistence that humbled and terrified her in equal measure. She felt the first flutters of movement, butterfly wings against her soul, and cried tears she had not anticipated, overwhelmed by the reality of it, the miracle and burden and incredible responsibility. She was in the library when the tears came, standing before a window overlooking the snow-covered mountains, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby moved with increasing strength. She had not heard Aaron enter, did not realize he was there until his voice, gentle as she had ever heard it, broke the silence. "Are you well?" She turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, his expression concerned, his body language open in a way he rarely allowed, walls momentarily lowered. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be caught in such vulnerable display. "I am well. I was just feeling the baby move and it overwhelmed me. I am sorry." He crossed the distance between them with careful steps, as if approaching something wild that might flee if startled. When he spoke again, his voice carried a warmth she was only beginning to recognize, a tenderness he showed to no one else, reserved exclusively for moments like this, private and unobserved. "You never need apologize for feeling, Alindra, especially not for this. This child, this life you carry, it is precious beyond measure. Your tears honor that." She looked up at him, at the man who had become her husband through accident and design intertwined, and felt something shift in her chest, something that had been frozen beginning finally to melt. Before she could think better of it, before caution or propriety could intervene, she reached for his hand and brought it to her belly, pressing his palm against the place where the baby moved strongest. "Can you feel it?" For a moment, Aaron stood frozen, his eyes widening slightly as the baby kicked against his hand, a tiny life announcing its presence with movements that were at once delicate and determined. Something cracked in his expression, some final wall crumbling, and when he looked at her, his eyes shone with moisture. He made no attempt to hide or deny. "I can feel it." His voice was rough, textured with emotion barely contained. "Thank you. For trusting me with this, for letting me be part of this miracle. You are more than part of it." Her words came without thought, truth flowing unfiltered from heart to tongue. "You saved us. You gave us both a future when the world had decided we deserved none. You have been nothing but kind and patient and protective. You ask for so little when you have given everything. I gave what any decent man should give: protection, safety, legitimacy. You gave more than that." She kept her hand over his where it still rested against her belly, holding him there, anchoring him to this moment. "You gave dignity when others would have offered only shame. You gave honor when you could have demanded I be grateful for scraps. You gave choice when you could have simply commanded, and you have given this child a father worthy of the name, even if the child does not carry your blood. Blood is not what makes a father." The words emerged quiet but absolute, conviction rather than opinion. Love makes a father. Presence makes a father. The willingness to stand between your child and everything that would harm them makes a father. These things I can give. These things I will give. I swear it to you. The baby kicked again, as if in approval, and despite the gravity of the moment, despite the weight of all that had been said, Alindra laughed, the sound bright and unexpected, joy bubbling up from a well she had thought run dry. Aaron smiled in response, a real smile that transformed his entire face, revealing the man beneath the king, the heart beneath the armor. And there, in the fading winter light, with snow falling soft beyond the windows, and an unborn child moving between their joined hands, something shifted between them. Something subtle but seismic, the beginning of something neither had been looking for, but both, perhaps, had been needing all along. Spring arrived with sudden intensity, snow melting into rushing streams, wildflowers erupting across meadows, birds returning from southern migrations to fill the air with song. The fortress awakened from winter's dormancy, windows thrown open to let in fresh air, gardens tended back to life, the whole place seeming to shake off sleep and stretch toward warmth. Alindra bloomed alongside the season, her pregnancy now impossible to hide, her body curved and full with life that moved constantly, making its presence known with kicks and rolls and what she swore were tiny hiccups that made her laugh at the most inopportune moments. She felt beautiful in a way she had never experienced before, powerful and vulnerable simultaneously, a creator of life and its most devoted guardian. Aaron's protectiveness intensified as her due date approached, his concern manifesting in ways both endearing and occasionally frustrating. He insisted she rest more, worried when she walked too far, hovered whenever stairs were involved, dismissed anyone whose presence seemed to tire her. His warriors teased him mercilessly about his mother-hen tendencies, but never in her hearing, understanding that the Alpha King's devotion to his pregnant mate was both absolute and not to be mocked where it might cause offense. She loved him for it, for the care that went beyond duty or obligation, for the way he thought of her comfort before his own convenience, for the gentle strength with which he helped her navigate a world that seemed increasingly awkward as her center of gravity shifted and simple tasks became complicated adventures. One evening, as they sat together in their chambers after dinner, she asked him to help her with something she could no longer manage alone. Her voice tentative because even after months of marriage, certain intimacies still felt strange to request. "Would you help me put on my shoes? I can no longer reach my feet, and the servant who usually assists me is ill." He was beside her in an instant, kneeling before where she sat, taking the soft leather shoes from her hands with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his size, his strength, his reputation. He slipped them on her feet with care, his large hands somehow perfect for the task, and when he finished he did not immediately pull away, but remained there, kneeling before her, his hands resting lightly on her ankles. "Alindra." His voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if approaching territory uncertain and possibly dangerous. "There is something I need to tell you, something I have been trying to find the right words for, but keep failing." Her heart accelerated, fear and hope warring in her chest. "You can tell me anything. This marriage began as duty, as necessity, a way to protect you and the child you carry. We both know that. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At least for me. I find myself no longer counting the days we spend together, but treasuring them. No longer measuring the cost of this arrangement, but feeling grateful for the gift it has become. I do not know when it happened. This shift from obligation to something else entirely. But I need you to know. I need you to understand. I care for you, Alindra. Deeply. I have come to love not just the child you carry, but you. The woman brave enough to kneel before a king and beg for her baby's life. Courageous enough to stand as my equal, even when the world questioned your right to that position. Strong enough to bloom despite being planted in such difficult soil. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were not tears of sorrow or fear, but of relief, of joy, of the overwhelming knowledge that what she felt was not madness or foolishness, but shared sentiment, returned affection, mutual recognition of something real, taking root between them. I love you too. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if waiting any longer would make them impossible to speak. I have been so frightened to say it, so afraid you would think me foolish or opportunistic. confusing gratitude with genuine feeling. But it is not gratitude I feel when I see you each morning. Not obligation that makes my heart race when you walk into a room, not duty that makes me treasure every moment we spend together. It is love, Aaron, as real and true as any love that ever existed. Despite how we began, despite how strange our circumstances, despite everything that might have prevented it. He rose smoothly, drawing her up with him, his hands cradling her face, as if she were made of something more precious than flesh and bone. When he kissed her, it was different from that first kiss in the stone circle, different from the chaste pecks they had exchanged in public as appearances demanded. This was a claiming and a surrender intertwined, a declaration and a question answered, a beginning written over all the endings they had both endured before finding each other. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, protesting being squashed between them, and they broke apart laughing, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air, sharing the same joy. "Our child is jealous of the attention," Aaron murmured, his hand moving to her belly, feeling the movement there, the life that was not his by blood but was his by every choice that mattered, every vow that bound. "Our child is making their presence known," Alindra corrected, covering his hand with her own, making sure we remember they are part of this love story too. Always. His voice carried absolute conviction. This child will always know they are loved, wanted, treasured beyond measure. Not because of blood, but because of what truly matters. Choice, commitment, the willingness to show up every single day and choose love over convenience, family over biology, heart over everything else. 2 weeks later, on a night when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky and the fortress slept beneath its silver gaze, Alindra's labor began with a contraction that ripped through her like lightning, sudden and all-consuming. She cried out despite herself, the sound bringing Aaron running from the adjoining chamber, still pulling on a shirt, his hair loose around his shoulders, his eyes wild with worry. "The baby is coming." She managed the words between pants, her hand pressed to her belly as another contraction built. The pressure immense, her body preparing for the monumental task of bringing new life into the world. The next hours blurred into a singular experience of pain and purpose, her body working with an intensity that left no room for thought, only instinct and endurance, and the primal knowledge that she was designed for this, capable of this, strong enough to survive this. Midwives arrived, efficient and experienced, arranging the chamber, speaking to her in voices meant to calm and encourage, but she barely heard them over the roaring in her ears, the focus required to breathe through each contraction, to push when told, to rest when possible, to continue when every fiber of her being screamed for it to be over. Through it all, Aaron stayed. The midwives tried to shoo him out, insisting this was no place for men. That tradition demanded he wait elsewhere, that his presence broke protocols as old as their people. But he refused with a finality that left no room for argument, his hand clasped around Alindra's, his voice constant in her ear, anchoring her when she felt herself slipping into panic or exhaustion. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. Breathe. Just breathe. I am here. I am not leaving. You are not alone in this. Our child is almost here. Just a little more. You can do this. I believe in you." His words became her lifeline, something to hold on to when the pain threatened to drown her, when her strength wavered and doubt whispered that she was not capable, not strong enough, not ready for what was about to become her forever reality. And then, after an eternity compressed into hours, after pain that rewrote her understanding of what her body could endure, after pushing that emptied her of everything but the desperate desire to meet this child, this life, this piece of her heart that had grown beneath her own, a sound filled the room that stopped time itself. A baby's cry, loud and lusty and absolutely perfect. "A boy," one of the midwives announced, placing the squirming, blood-streaked infant on Alindra's chest, skin against skin, mother and child meeting for the first time in the world beyond her womb. Alindra looked down at the tiny face, scrunched and red and absolutely furious at being evicted from his warm, dark home, and felt love explode through her with force that made everything else she had ever felt seem pale by comparison. This was her son, her child. The life she had fought for, begged for, nearly died bringing into existence. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking with tears that would not stop, did not need to stop, tears of exhaustion and relief and overwhelming joy. "We have been waiting for you." Beside her, Aaron looked down at the baby with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Wonder and love and fierce protectiveness all mixed together, his hand reaching out to stroke the tiny head covered in fine dark hair, his fingers trembling slightly as he made contact with this new life, this child who would be his in every way that mattered. "He is perfect." His voice was rough, textured with emotion that needed no apology or explanation. Absolutely perfect. The midwives cleaned and swaddled the baby, checked that Alindra was recovering well, murmured their congratulations and blessings before withdrawing to give the new family privacy in these first precious moments. The moon had begun to set, dawn approaching with its promise of light after darkness, new day after long night. Aaron climbed onto the bed beside Alindra, careful not to jostle her, arranging pillows to support her exhausted body. She leaned against him gratefully, the baby cradled between them, already rooting around for milk, his tiny fists waving with the uncoordinated movements of the newly born. "What shall we name him?" Alindra asked, watching as her son found what he sought, latching on and nursing with single-minded determination that made her laugh despite her exhaustion. Aaron was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the baby's back, feeling the tiny heartbeat, the rise and fall of miniature lungs, the warmth of life in its most vulnerable and precious form. When he spoke, his voice carried certainty that came from somewhere deeper than thought. "Kieran. It means little dark one, for his hair. And it means strong, which he will need to be to carry the name Darkfen as heir to all this. Kieran Darkfen." Alindra tested the name, feeling how it fit, the weight and shape of it. "It is perfect. He is perfect. He is ours." Aaron's correction was gentle but firm. That is what makes him perfect. Not blood or lineage or any of the things others might claim matter, but because he is ours by choice, by love, by the commitment to raise him with everything we have, everything we are. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and violet, the new family remained there, wrapped together. The king and the woman he had saved, who had ended up saving him right back, and the child who was heir, not just to a throne, but to a love stronger than law, deeper than tradition, more binding than any vow spoken before witnesses. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were always those who questioned Kieran's legitimacy, who whispered behind hands about the suspicious timing, the convenient marriage, the white-haired mother who had appeared from nowhere and somehow captured the heart of the most eligible and dangerous alpha in the realm. There were political complications, attempted betrayals by those who thought a child of uncertain parentage made for vulnerability that could be exploited. But Aaron met every challenge with the same fierce protectiveness he had shown from the beginning, making clear through word and action and the occasional necessary violence that any threat to his son was a threat to him directly, would be met with the full weight of his wrath, would result in consequences that would make examples sufficient to dissuade future attempts. He raised Kieran with a combination of discipline and devotion, teaching him the skills necessary to be both warrior and leader, instilling in him the values that would make him worthy of the power he would one day inherit. He trained him personally, pushing him hard but never without purpose, never without the underlying foundation of love that made the harshness bearable, even welcome. He also taught him gentleness, showing by example how strength was incomplete without compassion, How true power came from knowing when to strike and when to show mercy. How a good leader inspired loyalty through respect rather than demanding obedience through fear. Alindra watched her son grow with pride that threatened to burst her heart, seeing him develop into someone who combined the best of both his parents, fierce and kind, strong and thoughtful, capable of terrible violence when necessary, but possessed of a core of decency that would prevent him from becoming a tyrant. She told him the truth of his parentage when he was old enough to understand, explaining with honesty tempered by love that his biological father had been a coward who fled. But his true father was the man who had chosen him every single day since before he was born. Kieran listened to the story with the serious expression he had inherited from Aaron, processing the information with a maturity beyond his years. When she finished, he looked at her with eyes that held understanding rather than confusion, acceptance rather than rejection. Blood does not make family. His words echoed what Aaron had told her years before. The same conviction, the same truth. Father has taught me this. Family is who stands with you when the world stands against you, who chooses you when others would cast you aside, who loves you not because they must, but because they cannot imagine doing otherwise. By those measures, I have the best father anyone could ask for. The man who could have refused but said yes, who could have shown cruelty but offered kindness, who could have treated me as burden but has only ever made me feel like blessing. Alindra wept then, holding her son close. This child who had somehow become wise beyond his years, who understood truth that many adults never grasped, who would one day be a king worthy of the title not because of blood, but because of character forged in the crucible of being loved absolutely by parents who had chosen him with their whole hearts. On the day Kieran turned 16, Aaron presented him with a sword, forged specifically for him, the blade folded steel that gleamed like captured starlight, the hilt wrapped in leather and inlaid with silver wolves running eternal, the balance perfect for his height and reach and style. It was a warrior's weapon, serious and deadly, an acknowledgement that boyhood had ended and the path toward leadership had truly begun. But more than the sword, Aaron gave him words that would shape the man he would become, spoken privately in the training yard as dawn broke across the mountains. Father and son standing together as they had stood countless times before, but this time with the weight of transition, of passage from one phase into the next. You are my son. Not because chance or biology made it so, but because I claimed you before you drew your first breath and have claimed you every day since. You carry my name and will inherit my throne and my crown. But more importantly, you carry my hopes and my pride and my absolute faith that you will be a better king than I have ever been. You will face challenges because of how you came to this family. There will always be those who question, who whisper, who use your origin as weapon against you. When that happens, remember this. You were never a lie. You were never something to be ashamed of or hidden or apologized for. You were wanted. You were chosen. You were loved with a fierceness that would burn down the world to keep you safe. That is your heritage. That is your strength. Not the blood in your veins, but the heart in your chest and the honor in your soul. Kieran had grown tall, already matching Aaron's height, if not quite his breadth. His dark hair falling around a face that carried his mother's fine bone structure and his father's intense gaze. He took the sword with steady hands, testing its weight, feeling its balance, and when he looked at Aaron, his eyes shone with emotion barely contained. I will do everything in my power to make you proud, to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me, the faith you have shown me, to honor the sacrifice you made in claiming me when the easier path would have been to turn away. You honor me already, every day, just by being exactly who you are, strong and kind, fierce and compassionate. A warrior who understands that fighting is not the goal, but protecting what matters is. You are everything I hoped you would become, and more than I ever dreamed possible. They embraced then, the kind of fierce hug that men who love each other share, brief but absolute, conveying more than words could ever capture about the bond between them, the depth of their connection, the unshakable foundation of their relationship. That evening, the pack gathered to celebrate Kieran's transition to adulthood, a feast that stretched long into the night, with toasts and stories, and the kind of revelry that marked significant passages in their culture. Warriors who had trained him told embarrassing tales of his youth. Elders who had watched him grow offered wisdom for the path ahead. Friends celebrated their companion while secretly mourning the end of the simple days of youth. Through it all, Kieran moved with grace and growing confidence, accepting congratulations with humility, deflecting praise with humor, showing leadership qualities that needed no crown to be evident. He was his father's son in the best possible ways, fierce when necessary but preferring diplomacy, strong but never cruel, confident but not arrogant. Late in the evening, after most had retired or collapsed into satisfied stupors, Alindra found Aaron standing alone on one of the high balconies, looking out over the territory that stretched dark and peaceful beneath the star-filled sky. She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder pressing against his arm, comfortable in silence that had become its own kind of intimacy over the years. He is going to be an extraordinary king. Her voice was soft, not wanting to break the peaceful atmosphere but needing to voice what her heart knew to be true. He is already extraordinary. The kingship will just give him larger stage to show the world what we have known all along. You gave him that. You gave both of us that. The chance to become who we were meant to be. We gave each other that. Aaron turned to face her fully, his hands finding hers, fingers intertwining with the unconscious ease of long practice. I was drowning in duty before you came, suffocating under the weight of expectations and isolation, becoming something hard and cold and empty. You reminded me what it meant to feel, to hope, to love. You saved me as surely as I saved you. We rescued each other. She rose on her toes to kiss him. And even after all these years, after thousands of kisses exchanged in passion and comfort and simple affection, this one felt special. Felt like its own kind of celebration. A quiet acknowledgement of everything they had built together. Every obstacle overcome. Every moment of doubt conquered by the simple, persistent choice to love each other anyway. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but sure in its foundation. Built on a marriage that had begun in desperation, but had transformed into something beautiful, something real, something that would endure whatever storms might come. Because it was rooted in choice rather than convenience, in commitment rather than compulsion, in love rather than mere obligation. Years later, when Kieran took his place as Alpha King, the ceremony was attended by dignitaries from across the realm. Alphas and elders and warriors all come to witness the transition of power. It was a solemn occasion, weight and tradition heavy in the air, the young king standing tall beneath the crown that had been his father's, his mother's, his heritage earned through love rather than simple inheritance. But in the moment before the crown touched his head, before he became officially and irrevocably the leader of his people, Kieran turned to look at Aaron and Alindra where they stood among the assembled witnesses. No longer king and queen, but something perhaps more important. Mother and father who had loved him into existence as surely as if they had both contributed to his making. And in that look past understanding that transcended words, gratitude that exceeded expression, love that needed no declaration, because it was evident in every breath, every heartbeat, every choice that had led to this moment. When someone in the crowd, emboldened by ceremony or perhaps foolishness, dared to mutter something about the new king's questionable lineage, questioning whether someone of uncertain blood should really wear the crown, Aaron's response cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk, his voice carrying to every corner of the assembly. He was never a lie. The words fell into silence, absolute and unyielding, a statement that brooked no argument, permitted no debate, would accept no challenge. And then Kieran himself spoke, his first words as Alpha King, his voice carrying the same conviction, the same certainty, the same unshakable truth. I am heir to courage, heir to love that looked at impossible circumstances and chose to make them possible. Heir to a father who understood that family is built through commitment rather than discovered through blood. Heir to a mother who fought for my life before I even drew breath and has fought for me every day since. That heritage is worth more than any lineage traced through convenient biology. That foundation is stronger than any built on the accident of genetics. I am who I am because two people looked at each other and saw not obstacles, but opportunities, not duty, but devotion, not burden, but blessing. That is what I carry forward. That is what I will strive to embody. The understanding that true strength comes from choosing to love when it would be easier to walk away, from building family rather than simply accepting the one biology provides, from being a father not because nature makes you one, but because character demands you become one. The crowd was silent for a long moment, absorbing the words, the conviction with which they were spoken, the challenge they represented to centuries of tradition and assumptions about what made someone legitimate, what gave them right to power. Then someone started to howl, the sound rising into the rafters, and another joined and another, until the entire assembly was filled with the sound of wolves acknowledging their king, accepting not just his authority, but the truth of what he had said, the wisdom in words that redefined everything they thought they knew about family, heritage, and what truly mattered when measuring worth. That night, after the ceremonies concluded and the celebrations finally wound down, after well-wishers departed and the fortress settled into contented exhaustion, Elindra and Aaron found themselves once again on the balcony where they had stood so many times before, looking out over land that had witnessed their story unfold from desperate beginning to triumphant conclusion. We did it. Elindra leaned against Aaron's chest, his arms wrapped around her from behind, her hands resting over his where they clasped around her waist. We raised a king who understands that love matters more than law, that chosen family is every bit as valid as born family, that strength comes in forms beyond physical power. We raised a good man who happens to also be king. Aaron corrected gently. That was always the more important goal. She turned in his embrace, looking up at the face she had come to know better than her own, marked now by the years but no less beloved, perhaps even more so for the history written in every line, every scar, every silver strand that threaded through his dark hair. Do you remember the day I knelt before your throne? When I was so terrified I could barely speak? When I thought I was begging for the bare minimum and praying you might be merciful enough to grant it? Every detail, every word, every tear that fell from your eyes, every ounce of courage it took for you to ask what you asked. It was the day my life changed, though I did not understand it yet. The day everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted, about what mattered, began to shift. I expected so little. Just survival. Just the chance for my child to live. I never dreamed I would find love. Never imagined I would stand here years later, having been queen, having raised a son to kingship, having lived a life fuller and richer and more beautiful than anything my young, desperate self could have conceived. That is because you were brave enough to ask, because you had courage to kneel before a king and beg for what seemed impossible, because you refused to accept that you and your child deserved nothing more than scraps and survival. You demanded better even when you had no power to demand anything, and in doing so, you changed everything. For both of us. For all of us. The moon rose above the mountains, full and bright, illuminating the landscape in silver light that made everything seem touched with magic, transformed from merely real into something approaching sacred. Somewhere in the fortress, their son slept in chambers that had been his father's, wearing a crown earned through character rather than simply inherited through blood. Ready to lead his people with wisdom learned from parents who had taught him that love was a choice renewed every single day. And in that moment, with Aaron's arms strong around her and years of shared history behind them, and whatever future the world might hold still ahead, Elindra understood with crystalline clarity that sometimes the darkest moments of desperation were really doorways to the most profound transformation, that sometimes the things we beg for out of pure survival instinct turn out to be the keys that unlock happiness we never knew we were capable of experiencing. She had knelt before a king and asked him to pretend her baby was his heir, never guessing that the pretense would transform into truth deeper than biology could ever reach, that the lie she had been willing to live with would become the most honest thing either of them had ever claimed. Because Kieran was never a lie. He was proof that family is built through choices made every single day, through love given freely, rather than obligated by blood, through the courage to claim each other when the world says you do not belong together. He was testament to the power of mercy, offered when cruelty would have been easier, of kindness shown when coldness would have been expected, of love chosen when isolation would have been safer. He was the living embodiment of what happens when two wounded people are brave enough to trust each other, vulnerable enough to let walls down despite every reason to keep them raised, strong enough to build something new from the rubble of what came before. And as Alindra and Aaron stood together beneath the watchful moon, their story complete in its essential arc, but still continuing in all the small, beautiful ways that long marriages continue, they understood that this was the real fairy tale, the true magic, not in the drama of the beginning or the triumph of the ending, but in all the ordinary days between, in all the small choices to show up and choose love and believe that what they were building mattered, was real, was worth every sacrifice. And struggle and moment of doubt. The pretense had become truth. The arrangement had become devotion. The stranger had become soulmate. And the cub was never, ever a lie. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.